I can if you like.
Yeah, you do.
I know I have to do a lot of stuff for you.
So we're going to
I'll get
start now.
now.
So this should be called the David Gilchrist session, because first two of our speakers are obviously working with David on this research, and I'm really looking forward to all of the papers and sessions. So thank you for being here. Thank you, audience. Very important three people.
Absolutely. Thank you.
So would you like to begin today?
Certainly, yeah. I'd like to start by acknowledging Slash official custodians, the Wadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and pay my respects to elders past and present. I'd also like to recognise and extend my gratitude to the cultural and educational contributions made by First Nation peoples. Just to preface this presentation, I'll say that I'm quite thankful for being able to present it in its current stage. I'd really appreciate any feedback or questions you may have. Probably the easy ones in person and the harder ones by email, so I can duly ignore them. Just starting with an overview, I'll just kind of touch on the motivation for the work that David and I did. I should probably mention that David is a co-author. I take all the credit. Then I kind of touch on great literature, what it is, and the pros and cons, and how we kind of derived our sample of 75 reports to review, and then some findings, kind of breaking down thematically via theme, kind of operational sustainability, and then some issues on the demand side, so concerning participants, and then the supply side concerning service providers and kind of their financial sustainability and workforce. And I'll hopefully wrap it up with some meaningful thoughts. So then the National Disability Insurance Scheme, or NDIS, represents a reform of a magnitude unseen in Australia. At full scheme, it was estimated, I guess now, to cost 22 billion and support 470,000 Australians. That's risen now to, I think, about 550,000, give or take. Fundamentally, the NDIS provided the promise of better outcomes for people with disability, largely to confer greater choice and control of support onto participants so that they could exercise agency and live self-determined lives. Sustainability and long-term improvement in participant outcomes was supposed to be driven by more responsive and secure multi-government funding, and lastly, more efficient operation and composition of service providers was to be driven by individualised funding model and technical competition. So overall, I suppose the objectives of this scheme was a more responsive, equitable, cost-effective program. So I guess the reality of what we are observing now and what kind of led us to kind of take this review was kind of that there is a high level of underutilisation, the rate being 75%. 20% of payments go to the 10 largest providers, so we are seeing more of a market concentration. I guess there's and these providers are falling over time, and the access to the scheme is quite slow moving and difficult. So the scheme is, I guess, inherently complex, and we're not seeing what these promises were in their full fruition, which has led to persistent frustration with plan and support options and an increased pressure on service providers to do less with more while competing with others. Of course, regional growing pains are expected. The scheme is inherently complex. It extends across multiple government departments and governmental levels. Also, the bilateral agreements across government levels and the replacement of established services was kind of adds to the complexity. So it was somewhat expected. The aim here was to integrate this review after seeing that things in reports have been said kind of repeatedly over a 10-year period, and so we sort of looked at whether we could firstly identify and then assess the prevalence and persistence of these key issues, and provide commentary on the surrounding discourse and sentiment during the rollout. Secondary ANZTSR was performing kind of a canvassing of the scheme to afford this renewed vigour and I guess like provide a starting point for further scholarly inquiry. So shifting to the method, grade literature is quite a complex and extensive source of information. I looked for a definition kind of just quickly, and the Luxembourg definition seems to be the most widely accepted. That being, which is produced on all levels of government, academics, business and industry in print and electronic formats, but which is not controlled by commercial publishers. So I guess the key point here is that it's not published for academic use and not peer reviewed in the main. And yet these main types kind of consist of reports, submissions, inquiries, of the like. We started to focus on grade literature because it often provides a rich source of policy and research relevant information, which kind of offers some direct insights into the state of the scheme. Further, the sources are regularly produced by those bodies and organisations that are kind of engaged in the discourse and kind of have the coalface, if you will, in some respect. This, for instance, the National Disability Service. We work cross-sectionally to resolve these kind of myriad of issues arising from the rollout. And of course, there are a number of other organisations, including industry bodies and advocacy organisations who contribute to national discourse as well as government. Government in particular is kind of mandated to produce rigorous submission-based inquiries and reviews quite regularly, which kind of provide us, I guess, an internal timeline and kind of see how these issues are both persistent and in quite a few cases worsening. Overall, another advantage observed was that these sources were engaged with the sector's evaluated capacity and the degree in which the government kind of showed responsiveness to these issues. We definitely saw that there was sort of like the ratio of recommendations being put forward and acted upon was quite low. The other drawback, of course, as I mentioned, was that these sources don't go through any form of double-blind peer review, which is usually expected of scholarly work. So that we do have to be quite cautious with how we interpret these the conclusions found in these reports, because of course NDS being essentially a relocation of resources, there is an inherent political kind of tension there between certain actors and as well as varying distinct and overlapping objectives. And so looking at how we compiled the grade literature, so we started with a pretty, I think that one. We used a Primus framework, but it doesn't apply so that willingly to grade literature. So we used Gooden et al.'s methodology from 2015 to kind of develop a far more manageable, kind of comprehensive and intuitive gathering and screening of the literature found, while still kind of adhering to those key principles of the Primus framework. The scope of the strategy was broken down into 3 sections. So we have we searched 3 databases that house grade literature. One was Trove and Base and WorldCat. Using the keywords Australia and NDIS, we couldn't really include much more without kind of shrinking the catchment zone substantially. Second was a similar search using Google Scholar, which came up with a plethora of sources largely irrelevant. And then we did some targeted searches of websites. The filter period was between 2011 and 2020. And the inclusion criteria was largely based on, I'm sorry. Sorry. The pieces included were required to be non-peer reviewed and be published in Australia and essential objective was that they were contributing into the policy discourse in a more macro sense. These reports certainly did kind of focus, change the focus somewhat in specifics, but largely central objective was policy, which meant that we excluded reports largely focused towards medical, medical kind of inquiries, examinations. We also omitted educational materials for participants, providers, all of that kind of stuff. And you can see that there's a flow chart we included it, and we ended up with 75. Sample issue did contain reports from government, industry, and think tanks and these research entities. So we found that it was quite a reasonable level of representation across kind of the key actors who would be making these reports, or producing them rather. So moving on to the findings, I break it down into, as a kind of broader amount of groups before, but there's, I kind of picked out the key elements. One being the inadequate plan quality and the inconsistencies in these plans. Quite a contested element of the scheme, and as such had been a point of focus in quite a lot of the reports, particularly regarding the subsequent quality of plans. In later reports, the improper training of NDIA and these other coordination staff was linked to these inconsistencies, with eligibility criteria being largely unevenly applied between people with the same disability, and conditions were said to be quite poorly understood. So they're being asked to review things that they were permanent disabilities and what have you, and it was adding extra administrative burden. Understanding the scheme was prioritising intake rates over planning review appeared to lag Cole's first experience among planners. He was substituted by the wealth of experience and relationships among service providers and allied health professionals, which was observed over the period. Something that NDIA had long considered this conflict of interest, so that they had kind of pulled service providers out of these planning relationships, and in doing so, they lost a fair bit of relational capital, as I say, and experience in doing so. In 2018, the Federal Ombudsman launched an inquiry, largely due to increased plan review requests before the minimum finding that there was an added 620 requests for plan reviews were being received per week in 2018. So there's, I guess you can see there's quite a substantial added administration costs to the scheme, and it's diverting resources to the out from the rollout and ensuring plan quality. Another component of this was underinvestment in ICT systems, which made access to the scheme quite inaccessible, as well as there's definitely a investment. I think I've overshot here. Just pick that. So next was pricing, with 21 reports assessed some facet of pricing, or the pricing model. The web persistent issues regarding precarity in service providers covering transition costs. One of the recurring findings was these warnings that these trends are going to lead to, financial insustainability. And as you see, contracting providers sacrificing service quality, and there's a trend towards this casualised workforce. Maybe that's kind of the more demand side. There was a choice of control was being the central tenet of the scheme was seen to be restricted by thin markets. Compounding these pricing, accessibility, infrastructure issues appeared to kind of hinder what was necessary at the time. There was some evidence that suggested there was a 15% decrease in participant choice in support. These are So key issues areas were definitely housing and psychosocial disabilities. And yeah, there was kind of a aggregate decrease of utilisation it reached a trough in 2017. A little bit. We're going to have supply side, provides financial sustainability. Yeah, so 53% of survey providers were unable to meet demand. This was in 2018. 58% had no intention of increasing service levels. So there really was this, there's some clear signs during this second half of the 2010s that providers weren't being able to invest in capacity building and kind of meet the increased demand. And yet, 79% of providers were operating at a loss the same year. It seemed that besides, I guess, the under-resourcing in capital and labour, it really was a policy uncertainty issue. There was quite providers that were surveyed across numerous reports kind of stated that this uncertainty in whether they could invest or not was kind of played a key role in their service making decisions. I think this is lastly just workforce. Excuse me. I guess it brought a fair bit of workforce quality and security issues with the transition. There was an emphasis on service providers being casualising their workforce, which was seen in a few reports. This is these pricing caps and the transition costs kind of stifle wage growth. In a few reports evidence this, and there's kind of this these new perverse incentives that a fair few of the reports had mentioned. This transition to flexible workforce. Cordis has some surveying work that we did review, and it kind of showed that these more secure and lower quality resulted in higher turnover rates and absenteeism, which in turn transferred kind of these additional training and hiring costs onto firms. And kind of very much increased some negatable risks to service participants in largely due to staffing experience. I'll wrap it up there. I guess over the decade, the central takeaway from this review was that over the span of a decade, a wealth of evaluated capacity and resource have been devoted to identifying and then understanding, firstly, what the issues plaguing BNDS were, and secondly, the mechanisms driving these issues. The Great Literature provides a unique insight into the scheme from the perspective of key stakeholders. This includes the tensions in the discourse surrounding the scheme and the evolution of attitudes towards its reform. Commentary across the literature review suggests that the issues currently facing the scheme's rollout are well identified, with some first identified in its early stages, yet are not being effectively addressed still to this day. Across the reviewed literature, a total of 494 recommendations were noted, with only 3 being evidence as being even partially implemented. One being the temporary payments for service providers. Suggesting a period of stagnating reform, and I guess a cyclical policy discussion is very much not conducive to meaningful reform. I suppose that overall, the second key takeaway is that there's a significant opportunity inherent in these findings for scholars to provoke and further understanding, and enable us to employ more robust empirical methods to test the hypotheses present in the Great Literature Review. That's probably the most significant opportunity. Thank you.
Fantastic study to do. I hope you're sending your report to those shortly.
I got a minute. letter from the Minister yesterday saying thanks so much, it was really interesting and it really doesn't help us to do the NDIS. I'm paraphrasing.
Really? Because that's an extraordinary statistic.
It's
Only
just
three.
unreal, isn't it? Yeah.
But it reminds us of the ageing, residential care
Absolutely.
population.
Yeah.
The Aboriginal discuss all of these
Yes.
profound sort of revelations of value.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's what.
So both the state, the Premier wrote to yesterday and the Minister, that there's nothing we can do.
No, you can't see, no, as well as, yeah, as well as on the class.
So to carry on with the David I'd like to welcome Clare. Clare Feenan is going to talk to us about the relationship between inflation and the Human Services Index frameworks.
Thank you very much, Ruth. As I indicated earlier, I'm just going to time myself as well because I can quite easily talk underwater, especially on this topic. And both Ben and David have been the poor victims of that in the office for many times. So firstly, I want to say thank you so much for being here. This isn't the most thrilling topic, I'm sure, for many people, but it is for me, and I believe it's important to the sector. It's also really nice to be doing this on the second day of papers, so I've been able to see quite a few people in this room present, which has been very useful to me, and I hope that's helped present this a bit better to you. Any and all feedback is very welcome. This is mostly a theoretical piece, which Dave and I have worked together with a lot of the COS network in more practical applications. I'll go through a little bit of that as well. So anything on the way I deliver the material, because I'm not sure what everyone's engagement or interest or background in it is. So for my peace of mind, I just try and make it as clear and basic as possible, just so I can at least keep you engaged in what I think I'm talking about, and we'll go on from there. So I think also in 2022, this is quite a poignant topic, more so in anything else. So Dave and I, although I know David's been on his soapbox about this for perhaps decades, we've actually been able to team together with some quantitative data and be able to talk about it and get a bit of support. So it's a very exciting time this year for a topic like this. So I hope this keeps you okay. So these are the points that I'll be going through, bringing to discussion what indexation does in relation to human services, how it relates to sustainability, the way that I'll define a cost index for this reference, what currently happens in states and territories for Australia. So for a lot of the human services, it comes from the state governments and the formulas that they use and how that ties in with inflation. Consumer price index and wage price index, which we quite often talk about the indicators of inflation, but also in the formulas used by some of the states and territories, and also what moving forward we would like to see and how it all ties into future works and conversations that perhaps you can take away from this as well. So overall, the aim is for industry level sustainability. This isn't just for one organisation at a time being sustainable. It's about everywhere being able to engage properly with multi-year grants and the way that the prices change in line with inflation. This represents service mix appropriateness so that these organisations are able to represent their service users. So in that, we talk about the quality of services that are delivered. So if funding changes, they might not be able to deliver the same amount as a consistent, the quantity of services and the timing. So each of those are what we talk about for sustainability in the sector. It's not just about an organisation being able to carry on from year to year, because in the private sector, we talk about that's sustainable for a business, whereas in human services, sustainable means that they can operate as their mission by giving to the community in the ways that the community needs to receive. So organisation sustainability for the organisation's sake is not the objective. So the systemic approach is what we aim to do with this discussion. So indexation can insulate against unexpected service failure. It can be a bit of a cushion if something is underfunded in any way, then having that appropriateness, especially year to year, means that they are protected from economic shocks such as in recent years. Maintain the service mix that's required by the community, so that standard gets maintained from year to year, and manage the government's budget and forward estimates. So again, so the government is able to balance their books appropriately instead of up and down or maintaining the same amount, which isn't appropriate. However, indexation isn't mitigating cumulative inaccurate or inadequate indexation gaps. So as we'll talk about later, if this goes on for multi-year grants, which can be 10, 20 years, the gap will continue to grow every year. And either organisations then become more and more under pressure, or they have to then make business decisions that aren't sustainable for them or in the best interest for their service users. It also can't meet significant costing increases in real time. So the way that the indexation currently works, it might also be a delay that's coming through. Part of this is also how the budget works, but it's important to note that, especially in 2022, we've seen the Australian Bureau of Statistics go from quarterly consumer price indexes to monthly, because that's how quickly they need to get the information, and that's how quickly people are expected to be able to make decisions. This isn't just for the public, this is for government as well. It also can't mitigate capital shortfalls resulting from government policy change. So this can be anywhere from mandatory superannuation increases and minimum wage increases that we've seen this year as well. Anything else linked to NDIS as well, and standard business changes that are mandatory. It also can't respond to changes in need of services, which we'll talk about shortly as well, because this is delivering a standard. So when the demand changes, as we would expect, when prices also change, then if this isn't reflected, then that's not an indexation problem, that's also understanding the demand for the services. So overall, for the sustainability, we've got a number of challenges which we can meet by responses, and the outcomes expected by those. Sorry, I'm also looking at my time to make sure I can get through all this. There's so much. So the realigning funding and change with comprehensive cost over time, as discussed, this isn't by any means a quick fix. We are very aware that this is part of a much bigger process, not just indexation, as you can see there, but as part of a much larger piece of what is sustainable funding, what is the proper structures that are used in funding decisions. So capital injections that we talk about here to maintain capacity to meet policy change and innovate. So that can be for the gaps that have been created by funding and indexation inadequacies over time, but also changes that have had to have come through by business needs and requirements, COVID as well. Yeah, you can have these slides. There's a whole heap of presentations that are coming. This is important, but for the sake of indexation, I feel like the next couple of slides are a bit more exciting. Not this one, the next three are my favourites. So cost indexation essentially is a ratio representing changes in the price of cost factors between time periods. So as cost factors change, it's represented in the market basket, which is weighted by spending proportions. The Australian Bureau of Statistics calculates various indexes, including for the health and social sciences industry. So the Australian Bureau of Statistics, they're great, they're amazing. They know what they're doing, they're paid to do it, and it's all publicly available. My stick with it is that when we decide we want to represent a number, that it is not matched for what we put that emphasis on. So it is designed in a certain way for a certain use, and then sometimes if people don't understand, or they're not interested to understand, or they deliberately know, they use that number to represent something else. And that's where the changes and us putting trust on something like that can be quite detrimental. And this is where the fun bit for me comes in. sorry, the next slide. So this is to achieve a set, you'll see when it comes. To achieve a set standard as an output and changing costs and substitution. So when we talk about the standard delivered, this is the cost index that increases to maintain the same standard. These price changes are typically going up, especially this year, but it's to deliver this. For human services, the demands go up and down, as is the quality that we expect to deliver, and also the needs. So quite often, in a year like this and previous recent years, the push on human services organisations and the pressure they're under for the same things that we're under, then also increases the demand for those services. So not only are these organisations struggling to meet that standard earlier, that standard is also increasing. So either they then reduce the amount that they deliver, they reduce the quality, or they themselves start to make poor business decisions that they're just trying to do their best that they can, but the reality is they can't do long-term planning and sustainable measures. So in human services, the need for services organisation facing unmatched costs. So here we go. For an example, again, this is, like I said, very basic, just so we can all be on the same page. Imagine if fuel costs went up by 25% from $1.50 to $2. I know, right, stay with me. So you've got a couple of different options. You either increase the cost of your fuel and you use your car the same amount, and then you've got a number of different things you need to do. That represents your preferences in transport, and you have less restrictions in economic resources. So you either reduce your savings, your spendings in other areas, or you increase your debt, so credit card and that sort of thing. So your resources required to be able to do that, flexible movement of your spending, your wealth, cognitive capacity for planning economic resources, because we forget that that is a resource that we use, and then it impacts other preferences that require money. So whether that's other comforts that you've already had, other utilities, other lifestyles, or long-term planning in itself. Consumer B reduces car use by 25%. So that's, again, a huge impact, a quarter. I mean, by any percentage, but this is just one quick indication. So the preferences for that individual are around saving money and economic restrictions. They can choose alternative transport, reduce how much they move around. Their resources are then the time spent, cognitive capacity to change their lifestyle that they'd already had, perhaps physical ability, the location they're in, ability to adapt, but then it also impacts all of those resources they've otherwise used. Consumer C can use both, which is what we quite often see in reality of individuals, with preferences to a little bit of both, reducing spending well and driving, resources required time, but well as a combination of all, and a combination of all again. The reality is for organisations, this is what it is. The standard goes down, the quality goes down, or both. Now, one thing is, this is just a once-off here. This is week one. How long does it go on for? If we don't know how long that this increase goes on for, how quickly can you make a long-term decision? You can't. You really can't. The long-term decisions come from having the information and being able to say, right, next week I'll buy a Tesla. I will move close to public transport. I'll change some of my lifestyles, and that can be long-term investment, saves you money, saves you energy, saves all these resources, time, cognitive capacity, community location, and you can get by a bit better. But this isn't where we're at. This isn't where we're at for people or organisations moving forward. So the current index is used, sorry, one minute, is based off Australian Bureau of Statistics, who do a great job, as I said. Their index, they're much better statisticians than I'll ever be, that's great. And they, not offended in any way. And they use the wage price index and consumer price index by each capital city or state that they represent. Some are, such as WA, a combination of wage price index and consumer price index, or a set amount. So South Australia just has a set amount, 2.5%, up until 2025. That's still as it has been for the last couple of years. have just decided that that's their best option. So again, this is nothing on the Australian Bureau of Statistics. They're great. Why are we using these formulas? Sure, it's better than nothing, but if we look at what the CPI actually represents, it's pretty abysmal. Like, this is not at all what organisations should be getting funded on. The Consumer Price Index on the left-hand side and what human services actually operates under is on the right. So Consumer Price Index is based on household expenditure survey. This is what households consume. That includes alcohol, leisure, tobacco, holidays, all these optional purchases that human services organisations, as much as they might deserve it, do not get to spend their funding on. The outcome is, as I said before, not based on the demand. That's human services, which, as we've discussed, the pressures and pardon me, this is just a telescope plus one that we use for Hobart. I'm sorry. So this represents the city average household. This represents the state human services organisations. Optional purchases, as we'll discuss in the next slide as well, about what is discretionary and non-discretionary spending and how those prices work. Over-representation in essential items, elasticity. Also, as we discussed, the operating purchases, IT subscriptions, PPE for the last couple of years. That's obviously been a huge thing. And the way that the CPI is represented in human services indexes is how the household expenditure survey collects these things and the timeliness that that's done. So as we know, any new technology that comes through, the next iPhone is very expensive. A few years later, when it actually hits the market basket that the data is collected on, it's not representing this again, but organisations need these things. I'll move on to the next one because I feel like that's now. It also doesn't include taxes, interest charges, second-hand goods. So by this, I've never owned a car, which is quite an interesting sort of thought process. And also the human services organisations don't have the option of inheriting wealth, credit cards, loans. And this is why I was talking about the discretionary and non-discretionary. So again, not to insult anyone in this room, but things that we have to buy that are essential to us that are non-discretionary always get charged more. If something's going to go up in prices, those ones, because we can't opt out of that purchase. That's also what gets taxed more. If we can opt out of a purchase, they won't raise it so much because they need our business. The CPI is in the middle, but where do human services spend their money? This is going up. And as we talk about September in 2011, to this isn't even 2022 because this is as far as it went. Like, what is that gap? That's a huge gap. And this is only in about 10 years' time. That, I think, not only does that show what happens for human services organisations, but also just how far back this can impact organisations. Price index likewise has a typo, thank you. But it's also represented on state, not a human services organisation. So wage inflation as a cost of business is what human services is, but it doesn't include superannuation. It doesn't include human services specifically. It just includes the whole of Tasmania. The minimum wage, which we saw as the increase recently, that's all here. That's not balanced out in the wage price index. So also, as we know, female-dominated industry, human services, where does all that leave come from? The replacement, the option of additional leave as well. Recruitment, the extra leave bonuses, none of these things are actually represented. And this is just my fun hobby of the back of the Australian Bureau of Statistics, finding their methodology and where it matches up. But overall, it doesn't represent the index. It doesn't represent the sector. And like I said, this can be very different. So overall, the appropriate cost indexation is critical in service delivery, and without it, we will continue to see starved businesses an organisation which then make business decisions that aren't in their best interest either. They're not representative nor reflective of what we put emphasis on them reflecting. Over years, this starts organisations and what they can do for each other, for themselves. Recent years, which isn't represented in some of those graphs, but we can see further on, which have shown some advocacy for some of the states, but it's still nowhere near enough. The CPI 7.4, we're just going to keep seeing some of these things, and it's not represented in interest rates either, as we've seen. So appropriate funding would reflect changes in demand as well, which is outside the scope of indexation, but it's important to note. The need for services is not represented by the demand, and human services don't go down if the price goes up. If anything, they go up even more. So when we try and use this economic framework of the private market, it doesn't work. Like, who are you kidding with this? But for some reason, that's what I think some economists or perhaps some economist politicians would really like us to believe, that the NDIS just sees competitive market mean that everyone gets the best option, which, I mean, anecdotally and quantitative data like blatantly outlines is not the case. So to move forward, the monitoring analysis is required. Current boost for the sector to realign it is necessary as well. Even if you were to readjust to where it is, it would continue on the same trajectory as underfunding. These are moving forward points, but I've run out of time. Thank you so much.
Okay, that's really, really interesting.
Oh, thank you.
Wasn't at all boring.
Oh, thank you.
And I guess you have a long list to send to the ABS for
See,
conclusions.
yeah, I mean, they just do what they're meant to do. And this is it. They've even got some things in their contracts that say we do not support nor discourage the use of this in things. Because for some reason, in contracts, because for some ways it can be useful, but if that contract is written and doesn't include mandatory super increase or, you know, those sorts of things, it's so interesting if we don't know the background of it, like what it really is. For 1 year it's fine, but multiple years, yeah, it's very strong.
Well, thank you. Two great papers, and I'm sure we're now going to witness the third. I was giving a really interesting paper outside of her academic identity, but more her civil society identity, on the phenomenon of micro donations and insights into donor behaviour. So welcome, Anna, and thank you.
Thank you so much. And David has just left the room. Otherwise, I was going to thank him and Ruth for organising this. And Oshi, you've been a part of the, I guess, association. And so thank you for putting this together, because I guess as a marketer, I've been trying to look for this group. You know, where do I go with this kind of exploratory research? So I'm representing my colleagues from Western Sydney University. I'm basically a marketer, so usually we study consumer behavior. And when I started looking at the data coming through for one organization, which is going to be the case study as well, how about donor behavior there? Siddharth is our PhD candidate. This is not his research project. But he's the statistical expert there, and I'm sure he thinks he's better than the ABS. Bruce helped us with data cleaning because there was so much of data coming up, and Barbara was finally putting it all together. So yeah, let me just move ahead. So first of all, I'm going to introduce the organization, which is like our case study and the kind of data that we've got from this organization before I look at some of the exploratory findings, which then help us to define our research propositions or hypotheses, depending on whether we go for qual or quant study. So this is the Shaukat Khanum Memorial Cancer Foundation, which is based in Pakistan. And I guess people might say, why are we ever interested in an organization which is in Pakistan? Because 30% of the charitable donations raised by this organization come from overseas. And as everybody knows, Australia is a very multicultural society. We've got so many ethnicities, so many communities. And it is interesting to see how diasporas within Australia actually contribute and give money to their original homeland. So this cancer hospital, it consists of 3 hospitals now. It's got diagnostic centers and clinics, and it is probably the only cancer hospital which operates in Pakistan. And Pakistan is a huge country, big country, 220 million people. The public health system is not the best. We have an ever-growing population of cancer patients over there. It's a significant cause of death in Pakistan. And it's supposed to have a great financial impact. Research coming out of America shows that cancer patients are more likely to suffer from bankruptcy and other kinds of debts as compared to other people. So this hospital provides financially assisted treatment to 75% of its patients. It's been a few years now, since 2016, that we are registered here. I say we because I'm on the board, and that's how I was able to get the data with ethical clearance from the university's ethics committee. I'm very happy to also note that we've got a PhD scholar here who's worked at the hospital.
We just met here.
So,
Amazing.
So a bit of, just background to the hospital, started by the cricket star Imran Khan. And the reason why it's always in the news is because it seems to be a favorite with any visiting dignitaries and celebrities and so on. So we do get a lot of publicity for this hospital system. In Australia, things are very different. Our main purpose, marketing, I guess, aim is to connect with the diaspora in Australia and to try and just, say, hey, we are also here, give us your money and that kind of stuff. So our marketing is more like, publishing and printing pamphlets, handing them out at mosques and retail outlets. And probably the biggest expenditure that we have in Australia is organizing such networking events. So if anybody from Pakistan is visiting, somebody from the hospital, maybe a cricket star or something, then we organize such events. And once again, the main purpose is give us your donation money. So something about the Pakistani diaspora, because that's our target audience, that's our target market. These are the people that we are trying to connect with. And hey, I went to ABS as well, right? This is not the 2021 census data, but this is the 2016 one. Hopefully the data from 2021 will soon be released for different communities. So interestingly, there are more than 60,000 people. We suspect that this number is now going to go up to 100,000 people. It's a male-dominated community, but it's the younger lot. If you look at the age group, roughly speaking, more than 50% between the age 25 to 44 years old. Most of them are of Islamic faith. As you can see, fairly well educated, more than 50% have university degrees. But the interesting story is over here, because when we start comparing their income levels, then there's a significant difference between people born in Pakistan in comparison to people born here in Australia. In fact, this number is very close to the poverty line. And I guess that's what made things so interesting, that my God, these are almost people living close to the poverty line, and why are they giving us money? How come we get supported so much through them? So we pretty much downloaded the entire financial data set from the banks. So the organization has 2 bank accounts in Australia. Until 2021, we had no credit card system, no PayPal. The only way people could donate to the organization was by putting money into those 2 bank accounts. We've got tax deductible status, so that was a plus point. We had to spend hours, which means the team members just cleaning the data set, which I guess a quant researcher would know about. But as you can see, 2019, 2020, 2021, there's been a steady increase in the overall amount of donations and the number of deposits being made. And I would like to point out over here that 2020 and 2021 were the COVID years. So these were the years where we had the lockdown and people lost their jobs, and most of us were going through a financial, I guess, stress. But we discovered that our donations still kept coming in. In fact, in another paper where we did an analysis between, okay, how confident are consumers about the sentiment, the economic situation in Australia. The economic situation, the sentiment for that was going down, but the donations were coming up. In fact, we discovered there was a significant correlation between negative correlation. So this thing was going down, but the donations kept coming up. That made it even more interesting. Oh, wow, why are people, still giving to us? And then when we started doing further, just simple, descriptive statistical analysis, we discovered the most frequently donated amount was just $10, and that remained consistent over the years. So we raised about $1.6 million, but the average donation amount from just the diaspora, Pakistani community members, was $10. The average mean amount, of course, can vary because it does get impacted by extreme values. The median amount was again $10. We do not get any grants. We do not get any support from the government. So literally, we just go to the community and ask them for donations. Again, just interesting to see at all. So I guess we started looking at the concept of micro donations, and the only sort of literature that we could really find for micro donations was to do with political donations. And that too varies depending on where the literature is coming from. In America, a small donation for a politician is around $100 or $200, so that's regarded to be small. So micro donations was something which we found more sort of information from regular charitable organizations. So it's defined as the minor monetary amounts which are donated, which could be irrelevantly small for an individual donor. So really by just one donor coming in and donating $10 or $5 or $1, the definition says really, probably one thinks it wouldn't really impact the organization. What are the benefits? And once again, it wasn't really the journal articles, the academic literature which speaks about it. It was more the charities themselves talking about it. So there's the typical life cycle theory. Maybe the younger people start off by donating a small amount, and by the time they get a job and they're more stable, one hopes that they will then turn into bigger donors. In an economic downturn era, when you have recession, and maybe big donors can just suddenly vanish and disappear, it's your usual small regular donors who are going to be there. And so there's some sort of talk about that. We say it's the democratization of philanthropy. At least your agenda is not being dictated by a few big donors. And you've got this huge mass of people supporting you. And then there are some studies which show that these small donors can actually be the passionate donors. These are the people who talk about you, and maybe they're giving you a small amount, but they post your stuff on their Facebook or Insta or whatever. And so there could be, other kinds of benefits for an organization to be supporting them. So we started looking at just the micro donations. And we said, okay, if the median amount or the most frequently donated amount is just $10, let's define, everybody has their own definition of what a micro donation should be. We said, okay, how about if we put micro donation as $5? What kind of stuff then starts coming out of the 2021 data set? So that's what we started looking at. And I guess out of those micro donors, we discovered that the most frequently donated amount amongst micro donors was $1. So there were people who were just putting $1 into the account. There was one micro donor who made 440 deposits into the bank over a period of 1 year. So imagine, like almost more than once a day. So what's driving him or her to do this? And on average, if we were to just look at donors who make multiple deposits, we discovered they were doing 58 deposits a year, which is like, what, 52 weeks or more than one deposit every week. So what drives this behavior? Why would somebody, to be honest, I mean, I'm a Muslim, but it would be a drag every time you log in, make a deposit. Why can't they do it after the end of a month or something like that? Once again, just interesting looking at this behavior. So I guess we started looking at, okay, what motivates donors to make ritualistic micro donations? And we started looking at definitions of ritual. How do we define a ritual? It's an everyday act, symbolic, it's repeated, there's a sequence there, undertaken with formality, seriousness, and inner intensity. You really got to believe in something to be doing this again and again. So I guess we haven't done any field work as yet. We haven't gone out and spoken to the donors. Of course, I do it all the time, like informally, but we haven't started off with any interviews. I guess there has to be a data triangulation, not just speak to the donors, but maybe to the religious leaders or scholars or imams and try and understand what it is. But we did look at the literature, and we did look at a lot of the religious literature trying to say, do they make sense of this behavior? And the reason why we were sure that these are not, I would not call it religiously inspired, but faith-inspired donations, because with every donation, an Islamic donation type is listed there. So pretty much like Jews and Catholics, there are different ways in which one would make a faith-inspired donation. So there's sadaqah, and there's zakat, and there's, what else is there? Fidya, and so on. So anyway, we won't go into the details of what those different things are, but one of the key points was that, hey, this is what the good Lord desires out of you. It's a commandment. Give in the name of Allah. But we say it's not a religious donation because according to the literature, religious giving is only and only to a church or a mosque or a place of worship. These people were donating to a cancer hospital, a secular cause, but it is faith-inspired donation. And then we saw some quotes which are there in the literature, do not feel ashamed of the amount of charity you give is small, just to refuse the needy is an act of greater share. And there are tons of such quotes from the Quran and from other sayings of the Prophet and so on. So, okay, maybe this is one simple proposition. Another which becomes slightly more interesting is how people manage uncertainty. And we've got tons of material in the literature, in the business literature of how, employees and management, they all want to reduce uncertainty. So according to uncertainty management theories, people have a fundamental need to feel certain about their life, about their situation. Certainty provides us with a sense of security, and we feel that we are in control. And it is also well accepted that people do use religion to try and reduce any feelings of uncertainty. And there's been tons done in regions which have been afflicted by natural disasters or poor regions or where things are not really going very well. So that's where we try and believe in a higher power to reduce our levels of anxiety. And charity in Islam, as in with other religions, is almost seen as a way of worshiping, fulfilling the commandments. And it's been, actually in the literature, they say it's like trading with God, and it's like getting spiritual insurance, where you say, okay, I'm doing good, and now in return, you better look after me a lot. So he said, okay, maybe this is one of the things that it helps to reduce feelings of uncertainty there. And then interestingly, we came across one study which was in the psychological literature, and it said, my question about why are poor people giving? They should be the ones who deserve maybe something. It's like a coping mechanism, it says. So it's been termed as beneficial comparison, doing a downward comparison. selectively you focus on people who are worse off than you, and cognitively you make a comparison with such people. And in return, I guess it's common sense, one feels, psychologically speaking, better when you realize that there are people who are worse off than you. And I was delighted to see that actually there's a study which gives this explanation about it. And in spite of facing difficulties yourself, when you undertake such a thing, probably it adds to your well-being levels. So this could be one possible sort of explanation. So I guess we are now looking at going out there and actually, talking to Pakistani community members who are probably 99.99% of the times, they are the ones who donate to us. It's a popular charity with them. Like I said, we need to talk to multiple types of people and not just donors. Probably I wouldn't be the ones doing the interviews, because usually I'm there, waving the flag of this charity. So we are looking for some research assistants, perhaps a student, a Masters of Research, PhD student who could take this further. And yeah, just something which I thought was really interesting. But yeah, this is at an exploratory research sort of phase at the moment. Thank you. Thank you. We've got one more speaker.
No, we actually only have 3 speakers in this session, so Linda's racing off to another paper.
Yes, I just can't get enough.
So I've really enjoyed all 3 papers, and such a privilege to see such great research, and I think that all of them are really informative of the relationship between the sector and understanding the sector, like, those sort of explorations. And as a policy analyst, I find it just appalling that the work that you both do isn't informing political decisions.
So that's part of what we're doing, Martin. We're working with a few of the close networks and doing research with them, and then with Treasury from that. So part of the work has helped Queensland get a bigger, so they went from, I think it was 2.88% to 5.07, which still wasn't enough, but that with a few percentage points was $50 million, which is huge. So if you're talking about just a couple of percentage points, but like I said, it's still not enough, and it's not in the policy either for it to be ongoing. But South Australia set 2.5%. That's still as it is. Yeah.
But it's really interesting, because my partner's he used to work for the ABC, and now he writes about the ABC. And he's done a lot of analysis of funding, because the government, the last government particularly, claimed there'd never been a reduction in funding, but he did that kind of in-depth analysis and found it's actually a $22 million reduction over 3 years. And until you understand all of those factors that you related and how they can be excluded in measures, it's really, really important material. And I just flabbergasted by the poor model that they use as an index.
Yeah, well, thank you, because I find it interesting, but I don't blame anyone else that, we've got some.
But I think your, the note you made about the value of indexation is really important, that against a kind of insurance against unpredictable crises. And I think in a way all of the papers are related around that issue, because we see a spiritual, I love that term, a spiritual insurance. But also the NDIS is such a troubled policy, like it is. All of the stories that are coming out around the current practices through the inquiry show how appalling it is, and everyone knows anecdotes of individuals facing terrible interrogation and denial of the service because of the inconsistencies. But the political football that's become around the cost and budgeting, and it's, as in the keynote, as Richard was saying, there's plenty of money. It's just about deciding what's a priority. And here we have the system, it's like all consumer-directed care systems, it doesn't actually offer consumer-directed care because there's not really the choice, as you pointed out. One of the biggest failures is the providers don't give choice. And then I noted, 75% were not running a profit. So how they're making a profit now is appalling because they're reducing services. They're putting people with disabilities on, mental health, on medication, and putting them in nappies because no one's there to assist them. Really appalling outcomes based on the lack of proper financing.
There was one kind of other key issue that we had observed throughout the review that I didn't include, but it's kind of quite relevant here. There is that incentive first incentive to reduce costs in service provision, but also there was because it's now like a competitive contracting procurement system, the coordination between providers and kind of that care continuity across is being broken because now that they're seen as adversary organisations. So like a lot of that, I guess, as it's been touched on throughout the conference, that kind of intangible component of human services of the broader charity sector and profits, it's being eroded.
And it's through a marketisation of the management of, the interim level. So the people who were the original providers are still there, but they've got no control anymore because there's a whole new layer of the competitor tenderers who run the contracts. It's really terrible.
I have quite a close friend of mine. He's a support coordinator for a service provider for the NDS, and I was speaking to him the other day, and he used the term participant for one of the one of the people that access their services, and I had to check him on it. I was like, we use that word because we like that macro sense, like that policy sense, but like those on the ground floor shouldn't be calling them. And that's language is important.
Yeah, it's really. I found it really fascinating that $1 and 58 times.
What are the bank transfer fees for that? Like that's what I get. You know how it used to be like you can't use your card if it's less than X amount, or you get 10%. Like that's.
But they obviously do it online then too.
Online.
Yeah.
Most
But
of
it does
are
cost.
online.
There is a
I would
cost.
think there might be a cost involved, but
What is
we've
it?
also noticed that people don't want to claim tax deduction on this.
Oh, really?
Because they said this is in the name of Allah and we shouldn't be. And I said claim it and then give it back to us.
Yeah.
Well, the government must be very happy about that.
Otherwise, they're donating to the government. Is that what you're saying?
Based on the income of those people are not paying very much tax anyway, so they probably
It doesn't.
they will get like 2 cents in the dollar back, so it's not really worth it.
And I know that I don't have any proof or evidence of this, but people who are, what should I say, like the elite within the Pakistani community, they would usually not support the hospital because their views, political views may not be the same as Imran Khan's, and so they would not also support the charity. They'll support other charities, but not this one. So usually the people who support us are really the average lot and so on. So
But I'm delighted to hear that you're moving on to a qualitative study because there's so many questions I had, about the motivation. I mean, you can obviously speculate as you have appropriately, but to really understand the, that idea, to test those ideas, is it because it makes you feel like we're better because there are people worse off? And I also wondered, you said that there was a rapid increase in the occurrence of cancer. Perhaps the documentation is proving, who knows. But I wonder if, because of the diaspora network impacts, more people are having families affected by cancer, and therefore see a direct relationship between their family. That would be an interesting question to ask if they know people in Pakistan who've been affected by cancer, and given it's the only hospital, then there's probably a really high motivation.
Oh, absolutely. And sometimes we do have people who say that, they've had their mother or their aunt there. So, that's a good point.
A good question to ask.
Yeah, that's a good point. Absolutely.
But it's interesting because, of course, what we heard at the opening session was the critique. Richard raised it. It's called resource mobilisation theory, which is a conservative view of what people do when they contribute volunteering money or whatever, that they do it in their own self-interest.
Yeah.
And I think on one level, the spiritual insurance is exactly that. But on another level, maybe it is part of the social solidarity they still feel for their country.
Oh, absolutely. And that's what I find interesting, that different diasporas could be supporting their original homeland, maybe monetarily.
Well, cash transfers in the world from people in diasporas keep entire economies
Oh, definitely, Pakistan. That is the biggest foreign exchange earner for the country.
So I think
very interesting.
I actually had a question. It's actually to Anna.
Yeah.
I was a bit interested to know that because that $1, because I do myself as well donate $10 to a charity, but every month I do claim it back. But but I think the $1 thing motivation would be is that I think that because these people almost calculate each day. As in, I have a budget from this day. I'll probably save a bit of money for my coffee, and then I'll donate this $1.
Could be.
Do you actually think that any other faith, like let's say Hinduism, I know that Pakistan is more Muslims, same as in our country as well. So, but do you think that would be the same kind of behavior?
Would we see the same thing? Look, I believe, does anybody have experience with other religious communities?
I was raised Catholic, and I was just thinking, I wonder if it's more of the action of doing it, because now I have donations taken out of my account, monthly, which you see and you're like, oh yeah, great, that's good, it keeps ticking over. But when we used to go to mass as a family, you'd have the little envelopes that you put in, and that was an act. And when the money gets passed around, it's the act of it.
Did you ever think where that money was going to that hugely wealthy institution?
So I asked Anna Longley, I'm like, when are we going to see basic religious charities in the ACNC data set? Because they don't have to report anything unless it's less than 200,000 from the government funding, less than $200,000. They don't have to donate, and it always has to be only advancing religion is their subtype, so nothing, they can't have anything else as a secondary. And as someone who was raised Catholic, I don't agree with a lot that unfortunate, a lot of great belief systems as any spirituality hopefully does have, but the Catholic Church, in my opinion, and the influence it has on politics and what it's done throughout the world as well. There's a whole broad
alignment with the Nazis.
There's Latin America, just anything in there. So for me, the act, I think, is different when it's a deliberate action where you've thought about where the money is. Whereas for me at the moment, I'll get my emails and it's like, here's your receipt. It's like, oh yeah, great. But I think, with our family as well, growing up will be like, you get a coin to put in and you get a coin, and we all have that action of giving. So when it's a deliberate I mean, it's the end result, or even for me, maybe automated is more than I would if it's the physical action, but just that mental cognition, I think. I mean, maybe because I was raised quite very Catholic, it was, you know, good job, like this is us, which, I mean, I've obviously moved away from that.
Taxi driver, a Pakistani taxi driver once told me that before starting work every day, he makes a small donation. I was hoping it was to the cancer hospital. But he says it's like asking Allah for blessing with his earnings. And almost that as if this donation will then impact the amount he earned later that day.
Interesting.
So there's almost that
It
reward
justifies
thing.
all hope.
Catholicism, don't you get redemption from your sins?
Yeah, oh, as long as you say
If you donate
sorry.
money.
Yeah. But so, yeah, that's it. It's as long as you say sorry.
I'm sure we have something similar as well.
That's yeah, and so they don't have to report any of their donations, mind you. It's just if it's government funded, that's the cap. So they're not even government, like they don't even have to follow the rules of charities. It's anyway. So that's why I was like, Anna, excuse me, question. But I mean, that's a whole different system with the Australian government and the way that
But
works.
it's interesting because of the, you know, that early indivisibility between the church and the state. When the power, you know, it's shifted in Australia from the sort of Protestant to Catholic, depending on who's in government. Over the years, you know, and the Labor Party, of course, had a big split. But, it's very interesting, and I think it's great that you're doing that research. Because it's such an interesting idea about understanding not just the act of giving, but I would really want to know what they think happens to the money. Like, you've got a really clear sort of direct line supporting building, extending a hospital. But do they question when that $1, how does that $1 get there?
Is there actually more bank transfer fees because of it? Like, are you taking money away? Because I mean, I wonder if you can even get a timestamp of the time of the day, if it's morning or is it evening, or like days of the week, is it payday or just before payday, and that's what's.
I remember somebody telling us that to try and track down, you know, because for us the holy day is Friday, and probably most of the donations might be made on Friday. But by the time they appear in our system, it's actually a bit late. So we couldn't follow that. But I think probably there might be something there, just as you guys would do it on a Sunday.
What is just more information on it? Because it's such an interesting concept.
And it reminds me, I got interviewed by a young journalist writing for a new news site. I can't even remember the name at the moment, but he was doing a research. He wanted to do an article on the impact of COVID on people begging, because of course no one has any cash in their wallet anymore. So what's happened in some cities in the United States or the UK, what's happened is that a charitable organisation will actually accept donations on behalf of the person begging and accumulate it and then give it to them. And what I was thinking, you know, if there are bank fees that are eating away at this, wouldn't it be better if someone facilitated those donations, like they came not into a bank, but into a non-profit agency that accumulated individual sets of donations and then put them all together and sent them directly, because that's what they're doing with, and now there's even some people on the street who've got their own swipe card machine.
I haven't seen it. I was just thinking a QR code or something that you.
And another example, a charity did give people who are dependent, who are homeless, a little, you know, sophisticated swipe machine where you just enter how much you want to.
That's still a lot of admin costs for everyone involved, really.
But it's run by a charitable organisation. But it would be interesting to explore that, because if they give them $1 a day to someone who just accumulates it for them and then gives it over once a month or once a year. there would be benefits for the organisation if they accumulated quite a lot of interest, but it would also reduce the bank making money from,
I wonder if in lump sums it would be different for the individual receiving though, because bit by bit they can decide, oh, I can buy a meat pie or I can buy this. Whereas if it's one lump sum, so then what are they going to do with one lump sum if they've just received?
But I think it's like weekly, so they're not huge amounts of money.
Yeah.
Means they can, afford a decent meal and
Yeah.
a packet of cigarettes,
Yeah.
which would take a week to accumulate.
More than a decent meal.
But I think it'd be really interesting to explore that idea.
Thank you for all these ideas.
It's, you're here could accumulate the money different ways, so they wouldn't have to put it through the banking system, so that you could have direct deposit into your agency on their behalf.
I should find out what are the banking costs like. Yeah.
I know a lot, so like I've got an account with ING and it says like, if you like, you can round it up, every purchase can be rounded up.
Yes.
And then you can decide what to do with those things, or even at the supermarket, sometimes it'll say like, do you want to pay another couple of cents to the next dollar? Pardon? Oh, there you go, so I wonder.
So what do you mean, so you pay forward for your own expenditure?
So it can, at the supermarket, if it's, $43.55, it'll say, do you want to round it up? And the next 45 cents goes to the charity.
Some
So it's
farmers or something,
so I
And I
wonder
think
if,
that's the most popular way that micro donations are raised.
but I wonder if that's something they internalize, or, at the end of the day, I remember after working in retail, there was a woman that always wanted to round it up and get cash out for that. And it was just her way of knowing that the bank was always $10, $20, $40, and I don't know what she'd do with her change, because she must carry around a lot of change. But I'm not sure if it's a cultural thing of somehow some sort of rounding.
But also, what was the effect of COVID in terms of those donors? I can't believe you're absolutely right about the poverty line. In fact, full amount is below the poverty line. And anyone who's on sentiment job seeker, I hope they get back to job seeker, but they are below the poverty line. And if they're on an age pension, they're over. So that second amount would include those people. And I wonder what the age group, you said they're mostly young.
It's mostly, we just went to ABS and looked at the overall profile, but it says that these are usually young men who are probably here.
They're the most guilty, who need the most blessing.
The other thing is that when people from here don't let even in our community, because of the exchange rate, they think that it's $1, but ultimately it's like 100 rupees.
In Pakistan or Bangladesh, that's so true, absolutely.
So even if it's $1 actually to us, I was thinking, when I first heard, why $1? But then if you think about it, they don't want to do it 30 cents, 50 cents, but maybe they're thinking that 100 rupee a day.
Do you know what is the exchange rate at the moment?
130 rupees or something.
Wow.
So actually it's more than it's more than
And what's the average low income level per day in Pakistan?
Oh God, what would be check out the per capita income of Pakistan?
Because I know in India now there's $10 a day is middle class. $10. People are earning $10 a day as middle class in India, but I'm not sure.
It might be similar, I think, Ruth. I would think, maybe you can check it here. Might be, but yes, it would be interesting to see. I think we do have per capita, maybe even less than India actually. India might be higher.
So
it would be
that's a really good
interesting
point,
to
that
see.
the relative value is much higher than it is here.
And actually, one of our main marketing points after we looked at this data was If you spend $5 on a coffee, $5 in Pakistan can give a child 3 meals a day, a child patient or something like that, let's say. That is 500. What does it say?
And just keeping in mind that they do these donations on top of their sort of formal donation, religious donation that do with, Zakat Fitra. Because that's like your must
Like
do.
the going to
donation.
church in the Catholic Church.
Oh, yeah.
Two times a year.
Some are compulsory, you have to
Yes,
get.
so these are
some
actually on top of it.
Yeah,
So,
this is on top of
yeah,
it. Yeah, good point.
A friend of mine was saying the empathy or the attitude towards donation is also different if you're a local or if you're living here. Because especially since the floods happened, my friend and I, we were just looking at the news and we were crying and we were losing our minds and what can we do, what can we do? Then she went back home and nobody was not in the area. They didn't worry about it too much and they were like, oh yeah, that's unfortunate. Because they're so used to the bad news coming in any form over and over again that they become desensitized. It's a way to people who are not living in Pakistan.
So maybe overseas
So the-
Pakistanis are the ones.
There's just, I think there's that compassion because they're away from it and there's a sense of survival skill or something, I don't know. Like, oh God, I'm not there. I remember people asking me, is your family affected by the flood? But my family lives in the privileged areas and everything. I was like, and I actually thought, oh no, nobody lives there. And I felt worse about the whole thing, which is crazy. Because
Maybe you have to
really
Yeah.
But yeah, there is a lot of
May I add another comment? And actually, because this, and I would like to thank you for that idea as well, because during COVID time, in our country, a lot of people lost jobs. And obviously when they are earning such low amount anyway, because the purchasing power there is much less than here anyway.
Sorry, what
The
is?
purchasing power.
Yeah,
for
yeah.
being-
Yeah.
Unless you are sort of like a businessman or working in a high rank. Because working in a high rank versus working in an entry level, it's
There's a big
literally huge. Like, this company was 60 years.
A lot of them, the living in India and got had to leave. Were they part of that exodus? No.
Well, not really. I mean, Bangladesh is working in India, but there is a fair bit of maybe it was like on other, like Mumbai or something, but not much. But in Bangladesh, when they lost jobs, literally, well, like a normal family, many people actually had to pay. And what they did, and this is like a real story which my wife came across them, they're doing a housing boat house.
Yeah.
So they would go in full boat house so that nobody can actually recognize them. They would go at night and then just, put their hands out. That's all. And that's the real sense. And with your, one that you say that why not some, and actually indeed, in Bangladesh there's a charity called, what's the name? Actually it's run by a Hindu person. And then what he did is, he actually did that, like collected money from the mosque, under his charity, and then he would go and, like night, just go to people's home, the people who needed help, and then just slide it under the door. That's how this source of,
Easy.
Easy.
Easy Foundation has that. What's it called?
Yeah. Wow.
No, we might, if you,
Yeah,
we
we
could
got,
go and start
some
morning
coffee.
tea before.